Here are the top 5 nonfiction Black American history books. Number 1.
The 1619 Project argues that the true founding of America isn't 1776, it's 1619, when the first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia. This book says slavery isn't just a dark chapter, it's the central thread that shaped almost everything about the United States. Core thesis: America should be understood as a nation founded on and perpetually shaped by the institution of slavery and the ideology of black racial subordination, rather than primarily on the ideals of liberty and democracy declared in 1776. Book structure: expanded version of the 2019 New York Times Magazine issue led by Nikole Jones. 18 essays plus 18 poems and short stories by different black writers, scholars, and artists. Covers about 400 years from 1619 to the present. 1619 as America's true founding. Nikole Jones's lead essay, America Wasn't a Democracy Until Black Americans Made It One, argues that the arrival of enslaved Africans in Virginia marks the real birth of the nation, and that black Americans, more than any other group, have fought to make the country live up to its stated ideals. Slavery as the engine of American capitalism. Essays show how slavery built the U.S. economy. Cotton was the #1 export, financed Wall Street, insured by modern insurance giants, and enabled massive land expansion. How slavery shaped nearly every institution. Healthcare. Black bodies were used for medical experimentation. Gynecology literally invented on enslaved women. Music. Nearly every American genre, blues, jazz, rock, hip-hop, descends from black musical traditions born under slavery. Traffic and urban planning, sugar plantations to one-way streets and traffic jams in modern cities. Food, Southern cuisine and much of American diet rooted in enslaved Africans' agricultural knowledge. Law and politics, the Constitution's compromises, the 3/5 Clause, etc., were designed to protect slavery. The myth of black pathology. Multiple essays push back on the idea that black inequality today is caused by black culture or behavior, instead tracing disparities in wealth, health, criminal justice directly to centuries of policy built on anti-blackness. Progress is overstated. The book is deliberately pessimistic. Even after the Civil War, Reconstruction's rollback, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, and voter suppression show a consistent pattern of white America re-enslaving black people in new forms whenever freedom threatened white dominance. Unapologetically black-centered perspective. Mixes rigorous scholarship with personal narrative and creative writing. Calls for reparations and a re-centering of black history in how Americans understand themselves. Reception: mention the controversy fairly. Praised by many as a groundbreaking reframing of American history. Heavily criticized by historians, both conservative and some liberal, for alleged factual errors and ideological bias. Several states passed laws restricting how its ideas can be taught in schools. In short, the 1619 Project says if you really want to understand America, its wealth, its music, its inequalities, its contradictions, you have to start in the slave quarters, not the Declaration of Independence.
Number 2. The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. The book tells the true story of the Great Migration. Between 1915 and 1970, almost 6 million black Americans left the South to escape racism, violence, and Jim Crow laws. They moved to cities in the North and West looking for better lives. Instead of just giving facts and numbers, the author follows the real-life stories of 3 real people. It feels like a movie. Ida Mae Gladney. She was a sharecropper in Mississippi in the 1930s. After white men almost killed a family member over a false accusation, Ida Mae, her husband, and kids took a train to Chicago with almost no money. She worked hard her whole life cleaning houses and factories, but she finally owned her own home and lived to be 91. Her story is about quiet strength and never giving up. George Starling. In the 1940s, George worked picking oranges in Florida. He tried to get the workers better pay. The bosses found out and wanted to lynch him. George escaped on a train to New York at the very last minute. In New York, he got a good job working on fancy trains as a Pullman porter. He made decent money, but had to keep going back to the South he ran away from. His life shows how freedom still came with a lot of struggle. Robert Foster. In the 1950s, Robert was a talented surgeon in Louisiana. But because he was black, white hospitals wouldn't let him operate. So one night, he got in his Cadillac and drove all the way to Los Angeles. On the trip, no hotel would let him stay, and many restaurants wouldn't serve him, even though he was a doctor. In California, he became a successful doctor for famous people like Ray Charles. He got rich and respected, but he still felt lonely and like he had to prove himself every day. Through these three amazing people, the book shows the hope, the pain, the courage, and the cost of leaving everything behind for a chance at a better life. The Great Migration changed America forever. It built the black middle class. It shaped cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, and Los Angeles. And it changed music, food, politics, everything. If you want to understand modern America and why so many black families live where they do today, this book explains it better than anything else.
Number 3. Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo. Barracoon is a true story written by the famous African-American writer and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston. It was written in 1931, but only published in 2018, almost 60 years after her death. The book tells the life story of Cudjo Lewis, real name Olawale Kasola, the last known survivor of the last illegal slave ship that brought Africans to America in 1860. Hurston interviewed him in 1927, when he was 86 years old in his home in Africatown, Alabama. Who was Cudjo Lewis? Cudjo was born around 1841 in West Africa, in a town called Bante, in present-day Benin. He belonged to the Yoruba people and grew up in a happy village. He was training to be a warrior and was about to get married when he was 19 years old. The capture, 1860. One terrible day in 1860, warriors from the powerful kingdom of Dahomey attacked his village. They were working with white slave traders. They killed many older people, including the king, and captured young men and women. Cudjo saw his friends and family murdered in front of him. He and about 110 other young Africans were marched to the coast, held in a prison called a Barracoon, which means slave-holding pen, and then sold to an American slave trader named William Foster. The illegal Middle Passage. Even though importing slaves into the United States had been illegal since 1808, the ship Clotilda secretly sailed from Africa to Mobile, Alabama in 1860. The journey across the Atlantic took about 45 days. The captives were kept below deck in horrible conditions: darkness, little food, no fresh air, and chained together. Many got sick, but most survived. This was the very last known slave ship to bring Africans directly to America. Arrival in America and slavery. When they arrived, the ship was burned to hide the crime. The Africans were sold as slaves in Alabama. Cudjo worked on steamboats and in cotton fields for 5.5 years. He was owned by a man named Jim Mayer. During this time, Cudjo took the name Cudjo Lewis because it was easier for Americans to say. Freedom after the Civil War, 1865. When the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, Cudjo and the other Clotilda survivors were suddenly free, but they had nothing. No money, no land, and they were strangers in a strange country. They begged the Mayer family, their former owners, to give them land, but were refused. So the group worked hard, saved money, and bought land from the Mayers anyway. They built their own town called Africatown, or Plateau, Alabama, where they could speak their language, follow their customs, and govern themselves. Life in Africatown. Cudjo became a leader in the community. He married a woman from the Clotilda named Isabel, called Celie in America, and they had 6 children. They built a house, grew food, and tried to keep African traditions alive. Cudjo worked as a farmer and church sexton. But life was very hard. America was racist. White people often treated them badly. Their children faced discrimination and sometimes violence. Deep personal tragedies. Cudjo suffered terrible losses. All 6 of his children died before him, some from sickness, one run over by a train, one possibly killed by a white police officer. His wife Celie died in 1908. After that, Cudjo lived alone for almost 30 years. He was very lonely and missed Africa every single day. He said, "I can't see my people no more. I lonely every day. Zora Neale Hurston's visits in 1927. Zora Neale Hurston visited Cudjo many times in 1927. She brought him peaches, watermelon, and hams because he loved them. She sat with him on his porch and let him tell his story in his own words with his African English accent. She wrote exactly how he spoke, so the book feels like you're listening to Cudjo himself. He cried many times while remembering the past. Main themes of the book: the pain and trauma of the slave trade that never went away even 67 years later. How African people kept their culture and dignity even after everything was taken from them. The humanity of enslaved people. Cudjo was not just a victim. He was a husband, father, leader, and storyteller. The forgotten story of the last African-born slaves in America. Cudjo's death. Cudjo Lewis, Olawale Kosola, died in 1935 at about 94 years old. He never saw Africa again. He is buried in Africatown in a graveyard the community made themselves.
Number 4.
400 Souls, A Community History of African America, 1619-2019. 400 Souls is a powerful, one-of-a-kind book edited by historians Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blaine. Published in 2021, it tells the 400-year story of Black people in America from 1619 to 2019. Instead of one author, it has 90 different Black writers, historians, poets, journalists, activists, and professors. Each writer covers a 5-year period or a special topic. The book is divided into 10 parts, each covering 40 years, plus 10 beautiful poems placed between the parts. Why 1619? 1619 is the year the first enslaved Africans, about 20 to 30 people, arrived at Point Comfort, Virginia, on a ship called the White Lion. This moment marks the beginning of African America. The book ends exactly 400 years later, in 2019. How the book is structured: 80 chapters of 5 years each, 1619 to 1624, 1624 to 1629, all the way to 2014 to 2019. 10 powerful poems that act like emotional pauses between the decades. Every writer brings their own voice, so the book feels alive and never boring. Here are some of the most important periods and stories the book highlights. 1619 to 1690s, arrival and survival. The first Africans were not called slaves at first. Some were treated like indentured servants. But by the 1660s and 1670s, laws were passed that made Black people slaves for life, and their children slaves too. This created the system of chattel slavery that lasted 246 years. 1700s, resistance begins. Black people never accepted slavery. There were rebellions, runaway communities called Maroons, and secret plans for freedom. The book tells stories of everyday resistance and big revolts like the Stono Rebellion in 1739. 1770s to 1865, revolution and the fight for freedom. During the Revolutionary War, thousands of enslaved people ran to the British side because they promised freedom. The Civil War finally ended slavery in 1865, but the book shows how Black soldiers fought bravely while the country argued about their humanity. 1865 to 1900, Reconstruction and betrayal. After the war, Black people voted, went to school, and even got elected to Congress. But white terrorists, like the Ku Klux Klan and new Jim Crow laws, crushed Reconstruction. By 1900, Black people lost most of their new rights. 1900s to 1960s, Great Migration and Civil Rights. Millions of Black people left the South to escape lynching and sharecropping. They built strong communities in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York. The book covers heroes like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and everyday people who marched, sat in, and fought for freedom. 1968 to 2008, Black Power, Crack Era, and Hope. After Dr. King's murder in 1968, the Black Power movement grew. The book talks about police violence, the war on drugs that hurt Black communities, the rise of hip-hop, and the election of Barack Obama in 2008, the first Black president. 2009 to 2019, Black Lives Matter and New Resistance. The last chapters cover Trayvon Martin's death, the birth of Black Lives Matter, police killings of people like Michael Brown and Breonna Taylor, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, and the power of Black women organizing. Big themes that run through all 400 years. Black people have always resisted with words, escape, music, protests, and voting. America made huge progress, but every gain was met with backlash and new forms of racism. Black joy, culture, love, and creativity existed even in the worst times. Black women have always been central to the struggle. Freedom is never given, it is always fought for and won by Black people themselves. Why this book is special? You hear 90 different Black voices, young and old, men and women, straight and queer. It mixes facts with poems, making history feel emotional and human. It shows that Black history is American history. You cannot understand America without understanding Black people. 400 Souls ends with a simple truth. Despite 400 years of slavery, lynching, segregation, and discrimination, Black Americans are still here, stronger, prouder, and still fighting. The book says, the story is not over. The next chapter belongs to all of us. End your video with this powerful line. From 1619 to today, Black America has survived everything thrown at it and still rises. This is the story of 400 souls and millions more.
And number 5. The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Published in 2010, The New Jim Crow is one of the most important books about race in America in the last 50 years. Author Michelle Alexander, a civil rights lawyer and professor, makes one big, shocking argument. Mass incarceration in the United States is not just about crime. It is a new racial caste system designed to control Black and brown people, a modern replacement for slavery and Jim Crow segregation. The birth of the new system. After the Civil War ended slavery and the 1960s ended legal Jim Crow, white America needed a new way to keep Black people at the bottom. In the 1980s, President Reagan declared the war on drugs, even though drug use was actually going down. Politicians and the media scared white voters by talking about crack babies, super predators, and Black gangs. This created the perfect excuse to lock up millions of Black and brown men. The lockdown. The numbers are unbelievable. In 1970, about 300,000 people were in prison in the whole country. Today, over 2 million Americans are locked up, the highest prison population in world history. The United States is only 5% of the world's population, but has 25% of the world's prisoners. Black and Latino people are arrested, charged, and sentenced way harsher than white people for the exact same crimes. The color of punishment. Alexander shows proof. White, Black, and Latino people use and sell illegal drugs at almost the same rates. Yet Black men are 12 times more likely to be sent to prison for drugs than white men. In some states, 80 to 90% of drug prisoners are Black or brown. Police get money and rewards for arresting poor people in Black neighborhoods, not rich white college kids. The cruelest part. Life after prison. Once you get a felony record, you're in a legal caste forever. You lose the right to vote, in many states for life. You're banned from public housing and food stamps. Most jobs and professional licenses are off limits. You can legally be discriminated against for the rest of your life. Alexander says, "We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it." A Black man with a criminal record has less chance of getting a job than a white man with the same record, and sometimes even less chance than a white man who just got out of prison. How it's just like old Jim Crow. Old Jim Crow, 1870s to 1960s. Sign said, "Whites only." Black people couldn't vote, sit on juries, or marry white people. Everyone knew it was about race. Signs say colorblind and law and order. Black people lose voting rights through felony laws. Courts say the system is not racist because it never mentions race. Most white Americans truly believe it's not about race. Why most Americans don't see it. The media never shows white middle-class drug users going to prison. Politicians, both parties, win votes by sounding tough on crime. Saying Black Lives Matter or the system is racist gets attacked as reverse racism. So millions of white people honestly believe the system is fair. The way forward. Michelle Alexander ends with a call to action.
This is not just a criminal justice problem. It is the great human rights and civil rights issue of our time. We need a real movement, bigger than the civil rights movement of the 1960s, that wakes up all people, black, white, brown, poor, rich, to tear down mass incarceration completely. Main message of the book: slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. America has always found a new way to create a racial undercaste. Today, more black men are in prison, on probation, or on parole than were enslaved in 1850. Until we admit the truth, nothing will change. End your video with this powerful line: "We say we are colorblind, but the prison system sees color perfectly." This is the new Jim Crow, and only the truth can set us all free.
That's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.